Nara Oduya noticed the floor before she noticed the room. That was the thing about the Vethar deliberation tier. It was designed to be noticed. 600 years of architectural intention. A hemispherical chamber on Cool Station, large enough to seat representatives from 61 species in tiered galleries that rose in strict order of convocation seniority. The ceiling was translucent mineral composite, and the light that came through it was the color of old authority. The floor was hydraulic, adjustable by species rank. And the platform designated for the human delegation had been set, this morning, exactly 0.3 meters below standard. A minor calibration, the kind of thing that every camera in the room would frame as fact. Nara set her cup on the podium anyway. It was a dented steel cup, open-topped, the kind you'd find in a depot break room. She'd carried it for 11 years. She set it down on the lowered surface and it sat there unbothered. The cup did not care about the floor. 847 people. That was the number she'd walked in with. Unarmed survey vessels, Callaway Reach, 14 ships, distress pings sent and not answered. The Vethar convocation, the closest thing the galaxy had to a court, had determined those 847 people had been in violation of Transit Boundary Clause 14, subsection 7. Earth had 60 hours to apologize. What the convocation did not know was that the response had been ready for 28 years. Nara stood at the podium and listened to Senior Arbiter Vihethan Kul deliver his opening statement. He was 2.3 meters tall at full extension, 11-limbed, with bioluminescent patches along his back that ran gold when he was asserting authority, which was most of the time. His voice came through a resonant sac below his primary jaw. The translation was clean, but there was a subharmonic underneath it that registered in human chests as mild, sourceless anxiety. Nara had read a paper on the subject once. She'd found it interesting and then set it aside, because interesting was not the same as useful. Kul was saying that the enforcement action had been lawful. He was saying that the crew of the 14 vessels had been operating in knowing violation of boundary law. He was saying that the convocation expected Earth's formal apology within 60 hours, and that failure to comply would result in a secondary enforcement review. Not a weapon, not a speech, not a threat. One handwritten card, 3 sentences, and a cup left on a podium. That was all Nara had come here to deliver. She let him finish. She did not look at her cup. She did not look at the galleries, where 61 species sat in descending order of importance, watching. She looked at a point just past Kul's left shoulder and kept her face in the expression she used when she was waiting for a transport, patient, absent, mildly focused on nothing. From the back of the third gallery tier, a figure rose. Small, gray-mantled, fine-boned. The Sulathi moved quietly. And this one, Counselor Thessa M. Vale, 81 years old, 37 of them spent studying human history, moved toward the floor microphone with the deliberate pace of someone who understood they would not get a second turn. Her voice was cracked with age and very steady. Senior Arbiter. A pause. The chamber was quiet in the way it gets when something true is about to be said in a room built for procedure. I am asking this council formally not to do this. Another pause. I have read the record of what humans do when they decide a thing is necessary. Kul made a gesture with one of his 4 ceremonial limbs. A procedural dismissal. The kind that doesn't need words because the architecture of the chamber already says them. You are in the third gallery tier. Your species has no enforcement seat. You are, formally, a background note. M. Vale sat back down. Nara reached into her jacket. She took out a folded card, paper, handwritten, 3 sentences. She slid it to the receiving clerk without looking up. She picked up her cup. She left. The card's last sentence read, "Further communication from Earth will not arrive through diplomatic channels." The cup was still on the podium when the session formally resumed. There is a question people ask later when they are trying to understand what happened. They ask, how did no one notice? The answer is that it was designed to look like nothing. For 28 years, it looked exactly like nothing, because nothing is what it said it was on every form, in every filing, across every data system the convocation monitored. It was infrastructure. It was maintenance. It was, in Tamaz Becca's words, and he would know because he built the largest piece of it, the most boring infrastructure project in galactic history on purpose. The best way to understand Operation Drawn Quiet is to start at the thing that made it necessary. In 2249, 28 years before the session in the deliberation tier, the Vethar convocation turned back a convoy of human colony transports at the Reach boundary. 7 ships, 1,100 colonists, 6 weeks of supplies remaining. The transports had permits. The permits had been issued by the convocation's own regional authority. A secondary enforcement review had determined, 9 days into the convoy's transit, that the permits contained a technical deficiency under a subsection that had been amended 18 months prior without notification to the issuing office. The convoy was redirected to emergency relay stations. There were enough supplies. No one died. A formal complaint was filed by Earth's diplomatic office. The complaint was received, logged, and closed with a notation indicating the matter had been resolved within procedural parameters. No enforcement action was taken against the officers who had issued the deficient permits. No apology was given. Earth's diplomatic office issued a quiet internal directive instead. The directive did not have a dramatic name at first. It acquired one later, after Sina Calloway joined the team and decided that operations without names were hard to love. She called it Drawn Quiet, which she said sounded like what it was, something being slowly pulled into shape without making any noise. Havel Depot Station was where it lived, a mid-tier fuel relay hub on the outer edge of Calloway Reach, named for a survey administrator who had died before anyone thought the reach was worth naming anything after. It looked like a badly organized warehouse. 41 permanent staff. Lighting that flickered in the east corridor and had flickered for 6 years because the replacement fixture was on permanent backorder. The cafeteria served 2 hot meals a day, and one that was technically hot if you ate it fast enough. It was, functionally, the most important room in the outer reach. The 5 people who ran Drawn Quiet did not wear rank insignia. This was not a policy. It was just that rank insignia meant something only in rooms that cared about rank, and they had mostly stopped spending time in those rooms. Director Sina Calloway had been running Drawn Quiet's supply positioning for 19 years. Her official job title was Senior Depot Audit Coordinator, which was not entirely a joke. She did audit depots, and the audits were real. And if you looked at her personnel file, you would find a woman who had spent 2 decades ensuring that fuel relay hubs across the outer reach were stocked correctly and billed accurately. What you would not find, because it was not in her personnel file, was that she had also spent those 2 decades ensuring that the depot relationships were built with a specific kind of generosity, below-market contracts, reliable delivery windows, the kind of consistent good faith dealing that, over time, creates something stronger than a trade agreement. It creates a habit of trust. Commander Dara Ossel had written the Reach contingency files over 14 years. She had a habit of writing critical operational notes on the back of meal receipts and then filing them correctly in the Drawn Quiet archive, which meant that the archive contained both the formal strategic analysis and, stapled to the back, a receipt from a depot cafeteria showing that she'd had the lentil soup on the day she realized the relay routing geometry had a second use. The lentil soup had been good. She'd noted that too. Dr. Pella Anand was the team's xenopolitical analyst. She was fluent in 11 council species languages, including 3 that the convocation considered internally confidential, which is a polite way of saying she had learned them without being invited to. She had been corresponding with Councillor Thessa M. Vale for 22 years, on matters officially classified as academic exchange, xenohistorical research, the deep patterns of how institutional systems respond to the things they cannot categorize. The correspondence was logged correctly. It was also, quietly, the longest and most consequential diplomatic back-channel in the Reach's recorded history. Chief Relay Engineer Tamaz Becca had installed 214 relay stations across the Calloway Reach over 16 years. Each one was filed as a navigational hazard marker, a standard classification for any beacon-type infrastructure in a transit corridor, requiring no special permit beyond a standard survey notification. Each one was also in the second layer of its technical specification, a FTL routing handoff node. This second function was not included in the filing documentation, not because it was hidden exactly, more because no one had asked. If someone had asked, Becca said once to Sina over something in the cafeteria that was trying to be coffee, I would have told them. I just would have told them in a very boring way and they would have stopped asking before I finished. Field Analyst Wren, real name operationally sealed, human Sulathi dual national, assigned to Cool Station for 9 years as an embedded observer, had attended 31 convocation sessions as a press gallery observer. She knew which Vethar aides took their translation breaks at the same time. She knew which gallery tier had the best sightline to the receiving clerk's desk. She had never once been called on by a session moderator, which was the whole point. They filed the contracts. They installed the stations. They sent the letters, 28 years of doing exactly what it said on the form. Drawn Quiet was not a war plan. It was a maintenance log. 28 years of maintenance, filed correctly, indexed properly, and never once flagged as significant by anyone reviewing human infrastructure activity in the Reach, because it looked exactly like what it said it was. The relay stations looked like hazard markers. The depot contracts looked like routine supply agreements. The Palen data sharing arrangement, in which Earth survey teams had been providing complete, unedited Callaway Reach sensor data to the Palen archivists for 6 years, under a standard data sharing agreement, looked like what it was called, a standard data sharing agreement. The Palen were fastidious record keepers. They logged everything in triplicate. They did not ask why they were receiving the data. They simply verified it, filed it, and added it to their archive with the same care they gave to everything else. The Palen certification stamp on a document meant the document was authentic. It also meant, procedurally, that it could not be removed from the convocation's record. No one at the convocation had thought to wonder why Earth was sharing 6 years of raw sensor data with the galaxy's most reliable archivists. On the morning of the walkout, Sina Callaway was eating breakfast at a depot-level workstation, watching the live convocation feed on a screen that was too small and slightly tilted because someone had fixed the bracket wrong in 2261 and they had all just gotten used to it. She was eating something with eggs. She watched Nara set the cup down. She watched Cool deliver the demand. She watched M. Vale rise from the third gallery tier and say, in her careful, cracked voice, that she had read the record of what humans do when they decide a thing is necessary, and she was asking the council not to do this. She watched the procedural dismissal. She watched Nara slide the card to the clerk, pick up the cup, and leave. Sina put down her spoon. She opened a terminal. She typed 5 characters. The 5 characters were the activation code for the first phase of a contingency plan that had been in preparation for 28 years, had never been used, and had been updated, quietly, every 14 months, because the people who built it believed in keeping their maintenance logs current. Within 4 hours, 9 separate organizations across the Callaway Reach had received a single encrypted message. The message contained 1 sentence and a timestamp. Dr. Pella Anand Morrow had spent 22 years building relationships with 8 species that had one thing in common. They had convocation grievances and no convocation seats. The Sulathi, who maintained parallel records of events as they were versus as they were officially recorded. The Drain Collective, who ran fuel depot operations across 31% of the outer reach on a cooperative consensus model. The Tethian border houses, clan-structured, each one managing a specific class of navigation, relay infrastructure, and deeply territorial about their operational zones. The Palen, who certified things. The Orvith Remnant. The Kale settlements. The unregistered reach communes, a loose assembly of 11 minor species who didn't have a better name yet. The Pale Fringe Operators. None of them were militarily significant individually. Together, they operated 41% of the Reach's fuel relay and navigation infrastructure. They had never been asked to be powerful. They had never been asked to be noticed. They had only been asked to be consistent. 22 years of consistency is a different kind of force. 3 hours after M. Vale's floor statement, the Convocation's procedural office formally expelled her from the session for conduct irregular to her observer standing. The expulsion was clean, documented, and filed in the standard way. M. Vale walked from the chamber to a small room with a communications terminal and an encrypted relay address she had memorized in 2254. She sat down. She thought for a moment. She looked at the photograph on the desk. Her granddaughter, quarter-human, born on a border station in the outer reach 12 years ago. She mentioned it once briefly in the first sentence she sent. She did not mention it again. "How long do you need?" she asked. Sina had thought about this answer for a long time. Not today, over many years, in the back of her mind, in the space between maintenance audits and supply invoices, she had been asking herself this question and working out the answer. 14 days, she said. We don't need a battle, we need them to not be able to reach anything. On day 3, at 400 convocation standard, 214 relay stations across the Callaway Reach simultaneously entered a scheduled navigational recalibration status. The flag was automated. The protocol was standard. It generated no alerts in any monitoring system, because it was exactly the kind of flag that monitoring systems were designed to receive and queue for later confirmation. Convocation enforcement fleet vessels relying on those stations for FTL routing handoffs found their navigation systems queuing for confirmation signals. The signals did not arrive. The stations were not jammed. They were not destroyed. They were not dark. They were, in the technical language of the routing queue, pending. The requests waited. On day 4, the Convocation's Fleet Logistics Office filed its first formal complaint about the relay recalibration delay. The complaint was addressed to the Regional Infrastructure Authority. The Regional Infrastructure Authority's automated response system confirmed that the recalibration was proceeding on schedule and thanked the Logistics Office for their patience. On day 5, a second complaint was filed. The response was the same. On day 6, every outer-reach fuel depot operated by Drain Collective or Tethian Border House contractors closed for coordinated infrastructure inspection. This was a standard clause in every operating contract, the right to conduct coordinated maintenance inspections, exercised cooperatively with 14 days' notice. The notice had been filed correctly 6 weeks prior in the standard documentation window by a depot coordination office that processed several thousand such filings per year, and had not flagged this one as unusual, because it was not unusual. It was just the first time all of them had happened at once. The Convocation's enforcement fleet could not reach the outer reach on internal fuel reserves alone. Their logistics staff began filing urgent routing requests. The requests queued behind the recalibration notices. A third formal complaint about the relay recalibration was filed on day 7. The automated response confirmed that the recalibration was proceeding on schedule. Nara was at Havel Depot Station by then. She had a desk in the corner of the main operations room, not her desk, technically, just a surface that had been cleared of someone's filing backlog and had a chair near it. She drank her tea. She watched the routing queue on a screen in the corner, the one with the slightly wrong bracket. She sent a message to Sina. Day 9 update, she wrote. They filed 3 formal complaints about the relay recalibration. All 3 have been answered with the automated confirmation that the recalibration is proceeding on schedule. She paused, then she added, the queue is now 847 items long. I did not plan that, but I noticed it. Sina read the message. She thought about whether to reply. She decided not to, because there was nothing to add. And sometimes the right response to a thing is to let it sit there and mean what it means. On day 9, the Palen archivists completed their review. They had been working through the Callaway Reach sensor data for 6 years. Complete, unedited, submitted in the standard format, no requests attached. They had treated it the way they treated everything, logged in triplicate, verified against cross-reference sources, organized into their standard archival structure. Now, on day 9, they completed their formal certification of the full sensor record of the Callaway Reach enforcement action. Every distress ping sent from the 14 survey vessels. The vessel schematics confirming unarmed status. No weapon mounts, no military-grade shielding, cargo configurations consistent with long-range survey operations. The automated beacon logs. The response time records from the Convocation enforcement fleet, showing the interval between first distress ping and first fleet movement. The Palen organized everything into a table. The table was very clean. They filed the certification into the Convocation's own permanent record, because it was a convocation matter, and that was the correct place to file it. A certification, once filed by the Palen, cannot be removed from the record without a procedural challenge. A procedural challenge against a Palen certification has never succeeded. The certification was logged at 1422 Convocation standard on day 9. The Palen did not consider themselves to be participating in anything political. They were completing a standard archival verification. They had been asked to verify the data, and they had verified it, and they had filed the result in the correct place. They were also, incidentally, loading the weapon. The Convocation had spent 190 years building an enforcement apparatus. It had spent considerably less time wondering who maintained the infrastructure that apparatus moved through. On day 10, the Convocation's logistics office stopped filing individual complaints and opened a formal emergency review of the relay recalibration status across the outer reach. The review was assigned to a procedural subcommittee. The subcommittee requested a status report from the Regional Infrastructure Authority. The Regional Infrastructure Authority's automated response system confirmed that the recalibration was proceeding on schedule and thanked the subcommittee for their patience. The routing queue was now 1,200 items long. Nara was at her borrowed desk, the one near the tilted screen. She was reading through a supply invoice from a drain depot at Waypoint 4 when Sina appeared in the doorway with 2 cups, different cups, matching temperature, and set one beside the invoice without saying anything. Nara picked it up. Outside, through the one small window in the operations room, the outer reach was dark and full of pending requests. She had made one error in the first 4 days. On day 2, she had sent a message to Dara Ossel asking for a status update on the Tethian border house coordination, and she had addressed it to the wrong relay channel, the administrative channel rather than the encrypted one. It had taken 40 minutes to catch and recall, and in those 40 minutes Nara had sat very still and drunk her tea and thought about all the ways a 40-minute window can become a significant problem. The message was recalled cleanly. It had not been opened. But she thought about it for the rest of day 2, and she noted it in her personal log under the heading Things That Could Have Gone Differently, because she believed in keeping accurate records. The Tethian border house coordination had gone fine. On day 11, the Convocation's Enforcement Fleet Commander filed a direct priority request with the Convocation High Administration, requesting emergency authorization to override the recalibration queue and force manual routing confirmation from the relay stations. The High Administration opened a procedural review of the request. The review was expected to take 8 to 12 days. Sina read the notification and laughed, not a large laugh, just a short one, the kind that comes out when something is exactly as predicted. She showed it to Nara. Nara read it. She straightened her cup by a few millimeters, which was what she did when she was deciding something, and then she decided nothing needed deciding yet, so she set it back straight and went back to the supply invoice. On day 12, Dr. Anand Morrow sent a brief message to M. Vale's encrypted relay. The message contained a single question. Was the floor statement still in the session transcript? M. Vale replied in 4 minutes. The Convocation's procedural office had flagged the statement for potential expungement. The flag had been reviewed. The review had determined that expunging the statement would require a formal vote, and a formal vote would create a permanent record of the expungement, which would itself be impossible to remove. So the flag had been closed and the statement remained, procedurally irregular, in the permanent record. Anand Morrow forwarded the response to Sina with one word appended: good. On day 13, the Palen archivists completed the secondary verification pass on the legal challenge filing, pages 191 through 213 of what would become the document. 9 species signatures, each one verified against the Palen's own records of authorized signatories. Each one certified. The certification meant the signatures were real. It also meant they were now part of the Convocation's permanent record. The Palen filed the certification at 22:47 Convocation Standard, because that was when the work was done, and they did not wait to file things because waiting created unnecessary gaps in the log. At Havel Depot Station, most of the day shift had gone to sleep. Becca was in the relay room running one final check on the 214 stations, not because anything was wrong, but because he always ran a final check before a significant event, the same way he ran a final check before a maintenance window closed. Everything was still pending. Everything was still on schedule. He wrote in his operational log, pre-event check complete. All 214 stations holding recalibration status. Routing queue nominal. Nothing to report. He went to bed. On day 14, at 600 Convocation Standard, the document was delivered. Before that, at 5:47, the night shift operator at the drain depot in Callaway Reach Waypoint 7 ran her end-of-shift queue review. She checked the recalibration status on 214 pending routing requests. All 214 were still in status, awaiting confirmation. She marked the log nominal. She made herself a cup of something hot from the depot's machine, which was better than Havel's machine, but still not great. She sat down. She drank it. She did not know that in 13 minutes the Convocation would receive a 214-page document that would formally end the era in which the gap between formal power and functional power had been invisible to the people who held formal power. She was just finishing her shift. At 600 exactly, the Convocation's internal distribution protocol delivered one document, simultaneously, to every recognized member of the 61-species body. The delivery system was standard. The routing was automated. The document carried a Palen archival certification stamp on its cover page, which meant 2 things. The document was authentic, and it could not be removed from the record. In the Vethar deliberation tier, which smelled of pressurized mineral coolant, and the particular kind of formality that accrues over 6 centuries of institutional habit, Senior Arbiter V. Hethan Cool's terminal chimed. He opened the document. The first 6 pages were the complete sensor record of the Callaway Reach enforcement action. 847 names, organized into a clean table. Crew position, vessel classification, distress ping timestamp, response time log. The response time column showed the interval between each distress ping and the first movement of any Convocation enforcement vessel. The column was long. The numbers in it were large. The Palen had not added commentary. The table did not need it. Pages 7 through 189 were the operational history of Drawn Quiet. Installation logs for all 214 relay stations, dated and geolocated, each one cross-referenced to its original filing as a navigational hazard marker. Supply contract records for every drain-depot relationship, showing 14 years of below-market pricing and reliable delivery windows. Correspondence records from Dr. Annan Morrow's 22-year archive, indexed by date and species. Abstract summaries of 847 separate communications, each one logged as academic exchange, each one building one more strand in a web that the convocation had never thought to look for because it did not look like a web. The relay station technical specifications, showing, on the second page of each station's documentation, the page that had not been included in the original filing because it was a secondary specification and no one had asked for secondary specifications, the second-layer navigational function of every station, the function that made each one a FTL routing handoff node. 214 stations, 16 years of installation work, filed correctly every time. Page 190 was a single table. On the left side, 41 infrastructure nodes currently in recalibration status, identified by station number and reach position. On the right side, the current positioning of the convocation enforcement fleet, showing which fleet elements required which stations for FTL transit routing. The table had no title. It had no commentary. The left column and the right column were enough. Any reader who looked at both columns for 10 seconds understood that the convocation's enforcement fleet could not reach the outer reach, could not respond to any incident in the outer reach, could not enforce any ruling that applied to the outer reach, and could not do any of these things until 214 recalibration queues resolved. No shot fired, no fleet deployed, no declaration of war. Just a table, 2 columns, no commentary, certified by the Palen, impossible to remove. Pages 191 through 213 were the legal challenge, formal filing under Convocation Charter Article 7, challenging the Callaway Reach enforcement action as unlawful unilateral enforcement against unarmed civilian vessels. 9 species signatures, certified by the Palen. The challenge was filed. The certification meant it was real. The Article 7 pathway meant the Convocation's own procedural rules required a response within 52 hours. Page 214 was blank except for 2 lines. Handwritten, scanned at source, in Nara Oduya's handwriting, which was small and even and entirely legible. We spent 28 years hoping this would not be necessary. You have 52 hours to make a different decision. The infrastructure recalibration will remain in pending status until then. Cool's chromatophores, which ran gold when authority was being asserted, shifted. The color they shifted to was something his senior aide, who had worked with him for 19 years and had attended 31 of his 44 enforcement proceedings, had not seen before. She could not name it. It was not a color in the authority register. It was not a color in the alarm register. It was something else. He read the document once. He read it again. He asked for water. His senior aide, who had never been asked for water in 31 enforcement proceedings, got up and found some. In the third-tier gallery of the chamber, the gallery for press observers, the gallery where the sightlines to the receiving clerk's desk were best, a human Sulathi dual national in the back row closed her notepad. She folded it once. She put it in her jacket pocket. She had attended 31 convocation sessions as a press gallery observer. She had never been called on by a session moderator. She stood up quietly and left the gallery. Her work was complete. At Havel Depot Station, Sina Callaway had been awake since 5:30, sitting at the operations desk, watching the document distribution confirmation tick through on her screen. 61 recipients, 61 confirmed deliveries, all time-stamped at 060000. She watched the last confirmation arrive. She sat for a moment. Then she pushed her chair back from the terminal and stood up and went to find Nara. The convocation did not respond that day, or the next. The emergency session convened 19 hours after document delivery, at 100 convocations, standard on what would have been day 16 if anyone had still been counting days. It ran for 6 hours. The session was closed to gallery observers. At its conclusion, the convocation's chief procedural officer read 4 determinations into the permanent record. 1. The Callaway Reach enforcement action was formally reclassified as unlawful unilateral enforcement against unarmed civilian vessels operating under valid survey permits. 2. A reparations commission would be established, with terms to be determined within 90 days. 3. Transit Boundary Clause 14 Subsection 7 was referred to the Standards Review Committee for examination. 4. The floor statement made by Councillor Thessa M. Vale on the day of the initial session, ruled procedurally irregular at the time of delivery, was entered into the permanent record with a formal notation. The notation read, procedurally irregular, factually accurate. M. Vale was not reinstated. Her expulsion stood, but her words were in the record now, and the record could not be changed. Senior Arbiter Vihethan Kool did not speak during the session. His senior aide read all 4 determinations. Kool remained in his seat. His chromatophores, which had run gold in the deliberation tier for 19 years, during 44 enforcement proceedings, during 600 years of continuous institutional precedent, stayed dim. He did not ask for water again. He did not appear to need it. He appeared to be very busy being quiet, in the way that something is quiet when the thing that gave it its sound has been taken away. He had collected signed procedural rulings as a personal hobby. He had 44 of them, framed in the corridor outside his office. He had never personally witnessed the aftermath of one. 6 hours after the reclassification vote, all 214 relay stations resumed normal operation. The drain depots sent a brief notification to their contracted clients that the coordinated infrastructure inspection had been completed and normal service had resumed. No public statement was issued. Tamaz Becca wrote in his operational log in its entirety, recalibration complete. All stations nominal. Filing closed. He filed the log entry correctly. He went to get something from the cafeteria. The coffee machine was still not great. He got it anyway. Dr. Anand Morrow sent a message to Thessa M. Vale's encrypted relay at 900 on the morning after the session. The message was one sentence. The table on page 190 was your idea, originally. You said it in a letter 7 years ago. I kept it. M. Vale did not reply for 3 days. Then, I didn't think you were listening. Then, 20 minutes later, thank you. Anand Morrow read both messages. She did not reply to either. She filed them in the correspondence archive under the date they were received, cross-referenced to the letter from 7 years ago. She labeled the file correctly. 6 months after the session, the Peripheral 9 were granted formal convocation observer status. Not seats, not votes. A recognized presence. The right to attend, to be listed in the record, to have their names in the room. It was not what any of them had started with, 22 years ago, when the first of Dr. Anand Morrow's carefully logged academic exchanges had arrived in a species archive that no one at the convocation had thought to monitor. It was not a seat at the table, but it was a chair in the room, which is a different thing from standing in the corridor, and the corridor was where they had been. Sina Calloway's official title remained Senior Depot Audit Coordinator. She did not request a change. The supply invoices still needed to be audited. The depot relationship still needed to be maintained. She had a running joke that her job was the most boring job in the outer reach, and it was not entirely a joke, and she was fine with that. Wren returned to Kool Station for the 32nd time, 8 months after the session, as a press gallery observer. She sat in the back row. She watched the new procedural officer, not Kool's aide, someone younger, read the opening statement for a routine trade dispute review. She noted which aides took their translation breaks at the same time. She wrote nothing in her notepad. Her new notepads were different from the old ones. The old one she had closed on day 14 was in the drawn, quiet archive, correctly filed, with a note from Sina that read, Personal item, operational relevance. Retained per standard closure protocol. In a small room at Havel Depot Station. On the morning after the reclassification vote, Nara Oduya stood alone. On one wall, taped in rows on plain paper, were 847 names. Crew roster, all 14 vessels, alphabetical by ship, then by crew position. The paper was ordinary printer stock. The tape was the kind you find in any depot supply room. Someone, she did not know who, had printed it and put it up while she was sleeping. She stood in front of the wall for a while. Then she read 11 of the names aloud. Not all of them. 11. She did not have a reason for 11 specifically. It was the number she got to before she stopped, and she stopped when she felt the weight of it settle in the way it needed to settle, and she stood there and let it. She set her cup down on the windowsill. She did not pick it up again. The file had been delivered. The reclassification was in the permanent record. The 214 stations were back online. M. Vale's words were in the record. Becca's log was filed. The queue was clear. There was nothing left to place. An hour later, Sina found her there. She came in without knocking, which was what she did in rooms where knocking would be the wrong kind of interruption. She was carrying 2 cups. Different cups, same temperature, the same way she always did it. She handed one to Nara. Nara took it. Neither of them said anything for a while. The wall of names was still there. The room was small. Outside the one window, the outer reach ran on in the dark. Relay stations nominal, depots open, routing queues clear, the ordinary maintenance of a corridor that had almost become something else. Then Sina said, Vale asked what we are. Nara didn't look away from the wall. What did you tell her? I told her we're the species that files the maintenance log and hopes it never gets opened. A pause. 28 years of hoping. Nara held the cup with both hands. On the windowsill, the old cup sat where she had left it, dented, open-topped, still.